Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Contractor Revolution. What would actually happen to your business if, tragically, you died tomorrow? Hit by a bus, as they say. Would it unravel rather quickly without you at the helm? What financial condition would your family be left in? These are morbid questions for sure, but one's worth asking. Now, you might have a mental image for what you'd like to have happen, I'm sure, but without the right systems and agreements in place, you can be positive that none of it will come to pass. My guest on the show today is Sarah Cronin. She is the managing partner of OBEO Planning Group. She works directly with a bunch of our Breakthrough Academy businesses on their financial planning, their succession planning, and has a ton of firsthand experience helping small business owners wealth plan for the future and protect themselves and their families should the worst happen. So today's conversation was really interesting. We discussed a few things. Number one, what can and will happen to your business and family in the case of your untimely death? And I'm warning you now, it's pretty grim. Two, we talk about why for co-founders, dialing in a partnership agreement is one of the easiest ways to limit your downside in the case of death, disability, or disagreement. And lastly, we talk through how to start drafting a succession plan so that your wishes are captured in writing and executed on properly and not left up to chance. Sarah's also been kind enough to leave behind 2 tools for us. You can check those out by clicking the link in the description. Without further ado, let's get started with Sarah.
You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
You're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability. You've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting.
Sarah, welcome to the show. It's really good to see you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So, a bit of a morbid question here at the beginning, but an important one, I think. You always hear this term like, oh, what would happen if I got hit by a bus? And I always find that funny because I'm like, man, this is like a lot of buses out there hitting people. You hear it so often. It's like, where does this come from? But the analogy is about, you know, what really would happen to a business entity, a small business, a contracting company, if the owner, who in most cases is still hyper involved, were to pass away tragically, were to become impaired to the point where they couldn't run it, or have something happen to them where they just were removed from the operation. So I'll just ask you this question: in your experience and from what you've seen, what actually happens to most businesses when the owner dies?
The unfortunate truth is that as much as we're talking about, hey, what would happen if I got hit by a bus, most people never take it far enough to make a plan. So they pass away, it's sudden, and that's the end of the story. And typically the business winds down because there's a lot of functions that are not set up so that people can take the reins and run with the business.
Yeah.
Usually the spouse, maybe even the spouse was the bookkeeper or did an admin function in the company, but doesn't really understand the nitty-gritty of what's happening in that day-to-day business.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we see massive financial consequences. We see the business either wind up completely or sold for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And it's just an absolute nightmare.
It's adding, and there's sort of like, it's like a knock-on tragedy. Not only is this very, very unfortunate event bad enough, but now there's sort of implications. There's a ripple effect through the company and everyone connected to it. So I'd love it if you could maybe detail for us two different scenarios, like one, because they are different.
Yeah.
One is a sole owner, man or woman, owns the business entirely. It's their baby. It's just them at the helm. The other is a business partnership where there's a business partner, maybe a couple business partners. Let's start with the sole owner and then move to the partnership situation after. But can you talk about in depth some of the operational issues that crop up and then some of the financial issues that crop up for that sole owner that passes away? And then when you finish that, we'll move to the partnership situation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the best ways to help a business owner imagine themselves in these shoes is think about your last vacation and how was that for your team? Did they execute? How many times did they call you? When you came home, was all the work still sitting on your desk? Was it undone, or did they actually accomplish anything? Mm-hmm. Could they do bank transactions? Did anything happen while you were gone, or was it completely on hold?
Right.
Take it one step further, and now imagine you're leaving on vacation tomorrow and you have not warned anybody, and you're going to turn off your phone for 2 weeks. What would happen to your organization in that situation? Do you have the system set up? Do your key people have relationships? So this is exactly what we see happen in a business where the sole business owner passes away, is that not only is your spouse grieving, but suddenly they don't know where the bank information is. They may not even have signing authority for the banking information. Accounts are frozen. Your key people don't know what to do, and perhaps there's some fighting amongst them. Maybe there was some loose suggestion that you'd like your, 20-something-year-old children to take over the business. Do they know who's in first place and who's in second and who's doing what role? Are they fighting? What are the debts that the business has? Are the lenders knocking on the door to ask how these debts are going to be paid? So it's just a spiral of events. We unfortunately in our province see about 60% of people pass away what's called intestate, so they do not have a will. So further to that, most people leave no instructions upon their passing. And although this is a difficult subject, people consider this to be, a very significant issue, but not a high priority today, because today I'm trying to run my business and keep things going. And what I'd like to see people do is shift and run your business with an exit plan in mind, so that you actually have this set up in a way. It'll never go perfectly, but what we see is that the businesses typically wind down, or they're sold for next to nothing. If the corporate structure was not set up correctly, we see as much as 70% of the value of the business is paid in taxes.
How that just seems like such an insane number to me. 70%. That's a pretty large slice of the pie. Where is it going?
So what happens is if your corporate structure is not set up correctly, and you're not taking advantage of capital gains exemption, which again, this is a little tricky, and it would be looking at your personal corporate structure with the financial team. But if it's not set up correctly, there'd be a capital gains tax paid upon your passing. So there's a corporate tax bill paid. And then in addition to that, likely your family needs the money. So they're going to pull that money out of the corporation. And so when that money gets pulled out of the corporation, there's now a second tax. So there's double taxation on the value or the business, the money that's in the company. And that is where we see this 70%. You can't eliminate tax, but you can certainly do some key planning that goes into your corporate structure. Some families have there's different things we can set up to minimize that risk, but without any planning at all, that often takes place. And so your family is left holding, just a fraction of what they likely thought they were entitled to. We see a lot of business owners with really grand feelings about the value of their business because they had a fantastic year in revenue and the business is performing so well. And they actually don't know the true value. What's the market value of your business if you tried to sell it today? And so they live in sort of this dream that their family would be looked after because, hey, I have this great asset.
Right.
But what happens if that asset is gone?
Right.
Can your family pay the mortgage? Can they put food on the table? Can they still take that vacation, to Mexico every year or whatever your family traditions are? Can those continue? Children's education, on and on and on.
So, pretty tough spot because not only has this awful event happened, but now you're basically getting pennies on the dollar for what the business could have been worth because so much. It's probably getting sold undervalued because it's not as though you'd been staging an exit and really, making sure your P&L looked good for 3 years, making sure the growth trajectory is perfect, getting all the things in place that a buyer would look for. That is, by the way, how people kind of maximize their cash out at the end. It is not, we've talked about this in other episodes, you just mentioned it. It is not throwing up a for sale sign, chucking it on Facebook Marketplace, and you're all of a sudden a millionaire. I mean, it's a very calculated, coordinated, well-timed, and then there's still some luck involved to kind of step out of that business and exit it effectively with the money you want, or in this case, the money you're hoping your family would get. And then adding insult to injury is there's these huge tax implications as well. So your business entity and the staff they're in are in a really tough situation. The family's in a really, really tough situation. Is there anything else you'd want to detail about this sole owner scenario, or should we talk about partnerships?
Before we go into that, I just have one more thing that really drives it home is that, especially because the solo business owner, it's usually a business they've started themselves.
Yeah.
And so their families have usually sacrificed and gone through the hardship of not seeing their loved one, not seeing them because they're building a business, not maybe taking a vacation because they were reinvesting in the business and trying to establish. So when you think of the grind and the mountain that these business owners have climbed to achieve the level that they have, it's just an absolute just devastation when after all that hard work, it's minimized to next to nothing. Mm-hmm. And the other piece that really does often happen is, again, it's just human nature, and you see it in sports teams or really in leadership, is what happens to those key people who are in your organization. If they haven't been given guidance or thoughts around what might happen or why they would want to work to support your family in that situation, perhaps they're considering what's best for themselves. Can they take the business from you?
Right.
Do they have the relationships with your clients to walk away and start on their own? So the vultures really do, unfortunately, come out in that situation if planning hasn't been done. So that's why we often see just a complete wind up of the business in that scenario.
It's the same thing in families. I mean, it's like, I don't know, there's something that happens when people pass away. We just had a guest a few weeks ago on, who's talking about a very, very similar thing with his father passing away. I've seen the same thing in my own family, like with siblings and cousins. Like this, the vultures is the right term. There's a tragedy that happens, and then all of a sudden people go, well, hold on a second, maybe there's a little something in it for me.
Yeah.
So okay. Okay, so that's the sole owner. Is the business partnership set up when one of the partners passes away? Is that better? Is it worse? Is it vastly more complicated? Tell us. Really twist the knife here at the beginning. Yeah, we're going to start off. Yeah, we're going to start off at a depressing point. I should mention, guys, we are going to get to how to mitigate this in a minute. So just bear with us. But I do really want to outline the risks involved.
Yeah. So in the business partnership situation, again, without the proper planning, you can have the best intentions. You can have the best love for your business partner. So there's all those complicated elements in terms of the operations of the business and stepping up. So often in that situation, they're going to need to replace you. And you likely are not an inexpensive hire. Right. So now we're looking at a 6-figure compensation package to either promote someone from within or find someone externally who can come in and fill your shoes, and all the bumps along the way that are going to come in a sudden transition like that. Further to that, we have this little situation where your family is going, hey, this is a business that was providing probably a 6-figure income to them and supporting them. And they're going, hey, what's going to happen now? So then we get into a situation where if we haven't had proper planning, does your business partner have the money? So let's say the business is worth $4 million. Does your business partner have access to $2 million tomorrow to buy out your spouse?
Right.
And unless you've done some planning, probably not.
Because that's what the spouse is entitled to legally.
Yeah. Do you want to be in business with your business partner's wife?
Right.
Or husband? Usually no. Yeah. Usually we hear, horror stories about that idea, but they are now shareholders in your business. The shares would roll over to the spouse. And so unless you've put some plans in place to make sure of that, I've even seen in the BTA world situations where there have been business partners who have a permanent disability, and the surviving business partners don't have an exit strategy because planning wasn't put in place. So there's no trigger to remove that partner. So the surviving or the active business partners are building the business, they're building the value of the company, while someone who's unfortunately unwell is going to benefit in the long term. because they still hold shares in the organization.
So there's actually potentially quite a serious cash crunch situation looming in these instances, because unless they're sort of protected from it, this $4 million evaluated business, this theoretical business we're using as an example, it's very unlikely has $2 million kicking around in the checkings account that they can just go, sure, here you go. So like immense pressure put on the surviving business partner, because they, and I'm sure in 99% of instances, they want to do right by the family that's left behind, but the money's just not there. But we're going to get into later some more kind of like broad sweeping, like really good universal protection mechanisms. But just on this, one business partner passes away, the other's left behind, that kind of cash crunch scenario. Is there a mechanism, a policy, a product that's just easy kind of to preempt that?
Yeah. So, and this is actually really almost shocking to business owners, because sometimes they don't approach this subject for fear that it's like an expensive problem to have. But, if you're insuring a business owner who's in their 40s and you need $2 million of life insurance, we use what's called buy-sell life insurance. So that's to say, hey, there's two business partners, the business is worth $4 million. We're going to put $2 million of life insurance on each of those business partners.
Right.
This is not a problem that costs thousands of dollars. This is a hundreds of dollars solution, not, thousands. And
it's like a cell phone bill. Like it's not.
Yeah, it's not significant, and it will give you, and there's different, again, when you're sitting down with your financial team, like we're going to evaluate for you, what are the financial needs of the business? And so there are some incredibly affordable ways to execute this. And we would eventually long-term evolve that plan into something more permanent and, robust for you. But it is not an expensive problem to solve. And so there's really no excuse other than not realizing that just how simple it is to correct this issue.
Anything else you'd want to say about the business partner setup?
I think one of the consideration that may happen to that business owner as well, the surviving business partner, is still that question mark is, do they bother? Does the business survive, or do they go start over again? Mm-hmm. So, and again, best laid plans, but can they overcome the mountain ahead of them to protect your family? And since it's so simple to solve that problem, we just like to see that addressed in advance.
You would have a pretty unique vantage point on all this. How well protected is the average small business owner in this arena? Can you give them a letter grade? Can you give us even an anecdotal kind of take on this?
So I've been fortunate enough to work with probably 50 or so companies within the Breakthrough Academy world, as an example. And to be clear, Breakthrough Academy business owners tend to be a cut above the rest, because these are individuals who invest in personal development and growth and operational structures and what have you. So these are some of the very best companies. And I would say most of the time we see like maybe 10% of the people who actually have a plan in place. And often that plan is broken. They might hold insurance to handle that problem, but they don't have the agreement drafted by the lawyer. So if you just have insurance and there's no drafted agreement by the lawyer to actually say this money belongs to the family, and this is how we're going to value the company, and this is how that money is going to exit the company, then it's just money that sits in the company, and you're relying on the kindness of your business partner to go, oh, we intended it to happen this way, so let me execute what we talked about. Mm-hmm. So, and do they remember what was talked about? So no, unfortunately, it's a really small percentage that I see who actually have any plans in place.
Less than 20%?
Yeah.
Less than 10%?
Less than 10. Less than 10.
All right. So
unless there's a hidden market, a hidden group that I haven't bumped into yet.
Yeah, sure.
Even the best businesses, I find this is an area that people, maybe they're afraid to talk about it. It's uncomfortable. But it gets left out.
I'm sure they are. It's uncomfortable talking about it now, but it's like this is a scenario that I think a forward-thinking, growth-minded, family-oriented business owner, which is most of our listeners, ought to think about. I just because I'm curious. Well, before we kind of get to how to mitigate our risk here. Are there any other just like little known facts, surprising statistics, things people don't know about in this subject matter that like really shock people when they learn them? When you're meeting with someone for the first or second time and you kind of break this all down, is there anything that really just like leaves their jaw on the floor?
Yeah, it kind of comes down to, it covers a lot of area here, but it's like people will share with me, this is what I want to have happen. When I say, what would you like to see happen when you die? It's like, this is what I want. Well, I say, who's going to look after your children? This is what I want. Well, if that's not written down, if that's not in your will, and again, we already pointed out that 60% pass away without wills. And for the 40 or so year old demographic that we're talking about as these business owners, I'd say it's even less that actually have a will. Your wishes do not get executed unless they are written down. And it's absolutely shocking to see the number of people with children who say, oh, my friend Susan, like my brothers and sisters are a mess. I don't want them looking after my kids. They're going to go to Susan. That's not happening unless there's a will. And so just understanding the power behind that plan seems to be really missed. And the other one that we've talked about is, how about just laying out where everything is? Like, where are the bank accounts? What is the password to the computer? How do I get into my cell phone? Or how would you get into my cell phone to grab the 6 million photographs I have of the family history? There is this like endless number of things. So we have a tool that I can provide for the listeners that would help flush out all of those things.
I was thinking about that. Like if you think of an entrepreneur contractor, they're going to have, probably multiple vehicles. They're going to have an office. They're going to have padlocks. There's going to be storage lockers. There could be a couple cell phones. There's going to be various bank accounts. I mean, think about the tsunami of things that need to be accessed by the people left behind that are going to be, like attempt number 97 on the cell phone to get in. Like that just seems like an incredibly simple thing to avoid. It probably takes someone an hour to put everything on this tool in a centralized place. We will, by the way, link that in the description. You guys can download it. I had a look at it before we hopped on. It's very, very thorough. Sarah, let's move on to like how someone might begin to mitigate the risk here. I always like this idea of like, what's the succession planning starter pack? Like what's just like the baseline minimum viable? Because, and by the way, we could get super technical or in the weeds on this. I don't want to for a podcast. I think we just keep this relatively high level. And if you could give us some like large chunks that anyone can do and will save you really a ton of headaches, or save your family or business partner a ton of headaches, I think that'd be a really, really great thing to outline for us.
Yeah. And I think I would start by saying to any business owner who, the thought of sitting down and writing a plan of what happens when I die sounds awful and miserable. So instead of looking at it that way, look at it as a positive thing, as you're actually writing the succession plan for your business. Like, what truly is your exit plan? I know a lot of the listeners have had a lot of information from Built to Sell. So let's put a positive spin on this and actually sit down and say, what do I want to have happen to my company? And who do I see running it? And really lay out, like, design it. So you're going to write it down. And that has to start with, what do you want? I want my kids to run the business, or I want Johnny, who's been with me for 10 years, I want him to take over. So you're going to start with that, and you're going to design that organizational chart of what exactly is happening inside the company. What are the different systems that need to be in place? What are the different pieces? And every business is a little bit different. You're going to address, what do I want in great detail, flush it out. And then when you start to get into the second stage of this is, okay, I know what I want. How do I make that happen? What is the succession development plan? What training do people need to have in order to do that? Who do they need to know? Do they need relationships with, your key partners, your key customers, your key vendors? Make sure those relationships exist. And also, it's a great reminder to get out of the way and let that stuff happen. Stop being the center of your business, step back a little bit. And actually, when you're focused on what that succession development is and considering the possibility that might be executed tomorrow, lay out all of those details. Make sure your operations are transferable. Make sure those key relationships are there. And really, again, get in the real weeds on that one and look at all of those details. And I really strongly suggest that you have those difficult conversations with family members and with key employees. So if you've identified, you've got 3 top employees and you see them being the future of your company, sit down and talk to them. Is that what they want?
Right.
Do they share that expectation? Do they share that wish? And by having that conversation, you're going to empower them. You might see them step up even further when you've taken that time to have the conversation. If it's your children, it's even more important that you have that conversation. And keep in mind that fair and equal are not always the same thing.
What do you mean by that?
You may have 2 children and one of them is, an excellent project manager. They understand the business in and out. They've really got it mastered. And one of them, their skill level tops out at administration. They're doing a really great job helping out with the business. Is it fair? Although it is equal, to leave them in a 50-50 partnership, is that fair? Is that fair to the person who maybe went on and carried on with a degree and additional education to support the future of their business? So again, in that situation, we can use insurance products to provide additional, what we call estate equalization. So perhaps more of the business is going to go to the child who is excelling or in a key role, but we can actually still make sure there's enough financial reward to the other child, or sometimes it's the other kid may not be involved in the business at all.
Sure.
Yeah. So again, looking at that and having those conversations now so that everybody's on the same page about what the future wishes are. And they get to share their thoughts and their objections, and you can flush those out in detail.
One of the things that you said that I like is that you sort of instead of drafting up this like super depressing like death document on Google Drive, which is just a little bit too, a little too morbid, I think, for a lot of people. You approach it as just like a succession plan. You kind of think of this more and you frame it to yourself in terms of if I live to be 120, this is still what I would want to have happen to my business if I were to exit. And frame it that way, it makes it a little bit easier to approach. Is there anything when you've worked with clients who kind of work through this process, any unexpected benefits? Did they maybe enjoy it is too strong of a word, but are people surprised by the process? Are there things that they learn or bump into or new breakthroughs that they have with their family or their team? Like, are there any insights garnered from just working through the rigorous process of putting this all on paper?
Absolutely. I think it's a lot like writing your business plan in the first place. When you set an objective and you write down a goal, and if you really treat it like we were discussing, where this is actually the succession plan, again, I've seen it in the Built to Sell podcast. It's like treat your business like you're ready to sell it tomorrow. If you run it that way every single day, the possibility of you passing away untimely, that's the contingency plan. Plan A is, I want to see this business fulfill my dreams. I want to see it fulfill the dreams of my family and the legacy and what have you. So you can write it that way. You don't have to write the death plan.
Yeah.
And I think that really opens people up to a more enthusiastic approach to this. Setting yourselves up for the future, considering things like the key people that you have loved and worked with in your organization. Maybe you want to write in a bonus for them for staying one day when your company is sold. So make those intentions and write them down. And I think we all know as people who write goals, is you're far more likely to see that actually take place when you've written them down.
What else is in this succession planning starter pack? Any other just like universally good things for a business owner to do?
Yeah. So certainly we'll dive into sort of the financial elements of this plan. Insurance is a solution that absolutely should be part of both your personal planning for your family and also for your business planning. The purpose of insurance within your corporation actually serves more than just what happens if I die. It also, insurance can act as a tax planning tool, not only for when you pass away, but we can use it as something we call a retirement solution. So insurance has some unique properties, and we'll share, I'm open to talking about those details with everyone, depending on their structures and what have you. It can be a little different, but absolutely explore insurance inside your corporations. You need to make sure that will is dialed in. You need to explore whether your company needs a corporate will. You'll hear people talking about those these days. It's not for everyone, but there are certain scenarios where that is necessary. And this is a little morbid, but you should do the math on what it will cost when you die. So here's my, you're going to sit down with someone like me. We're going to have a look at your whole picture, and I'm going to do the math and say, here's what you have, and here's what it will cost.
Right.
So then you ultimately know what is actually going to reach the hands of your family members, and will that be enough? And if it's not, we address those issues ahead of time.
Can you briefly describe what a corporate will is and how it fits? I mean, I'm sure you could do a podcast series on those, but just high level, what's a corporate will?
Yeah. So the corporate will is just to, again, we want to avoid. So what happens with a corporate will is it will allow your business to bypass probate. So probate, the problem with probate is that it's going to take time. It's going to slow things down. So it could interfere with the operations of your company.
What is that? What's probate?
Probate is the taxes that are going to be, it's the execution of your estate.
Right.
So they're going to have a look at everything. This is something that a lawyer would explore with you. And certainly when I'm looking with a client, we can explore. It depends on the function of the business. So if we need to make sure there is no interruption in the operation of the company, then perhaps a corporate will is something to consider. Sometimes a business will ask me if they need a corporate will. Well, we are often looking at how much money is in the company. What's the value of the company? That might play in if we're just looking at a financial consideration. If the company is not worth anything and it's likely to wind down, probably not a corporate will situation. So that's something that your legal team and your financial team would explore with you to determine. It is definitely not something that everyone needs, but certainly a conversation that everyone should have.
Can we talk a little bit about going back to the partnership situation and really actually zoom in on the partnership agreement? This is something that I know is done, using your words, done quite poorly in like 99% of cases, or not done at all. And it rears its ugly head. I mean, even in a situation where no one passes away, but maybe partners split up, a lack of a partnership agreement is a sort of a bomb waiting to go off inside most businesses. So maybe talk about what you see there, and just some practical steps a set of business partners could take.
So a partnership agreement is going to address what happens if someone dies, what happens if there's a disagreement, or what happens if there's a disability, and a bunch of other things. But what we often see is that I will meet someone and they say, yes, we're in a partnership. And if they have a partnership agreement, again, often it's a handshake deal at a Denny's or wherever, and they've gone off into the sunset and created a business that's generating, $3 million or $4 million of annual revenue. And no one looked back and went, oh, we probably should document exactly what's going to happen here.
Right.
So some of the hazards we see is one partner gets divorced. Now what? Right? So one partner has a disability, or, heaven forbid, has an addiction issue, or these things, a mental health crisis. Like
this
these
stuff
things
happens.
pop up.
I mean,
it happens all the time.
Happens all the time. Yeah, these are not like these bizarre out there scenarios like some Final Fantasy thing where it's a perfect storm that has like people have substance abuse problems. The divorce rate is at 50%. I mean, these are very, very real icebergs out there floating.
Yeah. Sometimes we see scenarios where perhaps they're silent business partners and they're more financial business partners than they are active business partners in the company. So you might have a financial business partner who happens to have really deep pockets. Mm-hmm. And guess what they would do is they'd just step in and take the business from your family if something happened. Mm-hmm. So these provisions need to be done. And the few scenarios scenarios where we do find, hey, we do have a partnership agreement. Like, okay, excellent. Have you read it? Do you know what it means? Was it a template provided to you by a legal team, or is it something that you've read and understood? There's a clause in these contracts that's called a shotgun clause, and that's to say that in a dispute situation, you and I own a business, then I say to you, hey, Benji, I'd like to buy you out of the company. I'm going to offer you, $500,000. And let's say we both know the business is worth $1 million, but I'm going to buy you out. I'm going to offer you a really low deal. In the shotgun clause, you have the opportunity to say, no, thank you. But hey, guess what? I'll buy the business from you for that amount. So there's some different mechanisms that allow people to operate on a fair, reasonable playing field. And those things need to be discussed in advance. And they need to be discussed when things are good. Like, this isn't something we have a conversation about when things get ugly. And I think we all know partnerships, it's like a marriage. So 50% or more are going to break up. There's going to be some tough times.
I think it's way higher in the business world. I think it's actually quite a lot. I think it's something like 75. It's a lot higher.
Yeah. So we need to have these conversations, and we need these documents ahead of time, just to make sure that everybody's looked after.
This is something that a good lawyer, like any good lawyer legal team, would be able to draft up for you, correct?
Yeah. And I would say the same of your entire financial team, is that take the time to ask questions. So some of these professionals, they do this all day long. So they're going to give you this document. And unless you stop and ask them questions, they're going to assume you understand, or they're going to assume you know what's there. Even your accounting teams, they're going to recommend a corporate structure. And unless you've actually shared with them, like, where you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years, like, they're not proactively looking ahead. They're going, how do we manage exactly what was put on my desk today? So ask questions, push, ask more and more questions, and don't, make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to.
They're also going to use esoteric language that you don't fully understand to make themselves sound really smart and really, really expert. So don't do what I've done in many instances and go, when it's really like, no, I don't understand. Ask the question. Say you don't understand.
It's important to choose a team that you relate to, that you feel comfortable asking. So if your lawyer isn't someone you feel comfortable talking to, I'd reconsider who you're working with. And the same for your entire financial team. You want that transparency. You want to feel that you relate to that person, and that you trust them, and you feel comfortable. Ask the questions. You're paying for their time. And most of the time, I think they really want to help you. But if you don't ask, they can't help.
Anything else you want to fit in here before we close on the succession planning starter pack?
No, I think I just really want to hammer the concept of write it down. Just like your business, write it down and revisit it every year.
Thoughts and wishes and prayers and conversations and intentions, none of that means anything.
Yeah, you got to write it down and let it inspire you. If it wasn't good the first time, identify where the gaps are. Identify what you're missing and catch that next time, and use those as notes on, hey, I need to really improve in these areas, and spend some time on it. Make sure the team of people that surround you can support the areas that you struggle with.
So this is a great little tour for someone who maybe has been a lingering question. They don't really know where to start. So this is a great sort of summary and walkthrough of what can happen and some practical steps anyone can take. The deeper layers, the actual implementation of this is always, case by case. This isn't a template. This is something that you need to do for your situation and your partner and your business and your market and your family. So if someone did want to do that, where could someone connect with you? Can you maybe just give us, websites, contacts, stuff like that?
Yeah. So website is obeoplanning.ca. My email is sarah@obeoplanning.ca. You can find us on all your social media platforms, LinkedIn, all of that. You can also find me in the Breakthrough Academy Toolbox. So you'll see me at the upcoming Winter Summit. And we just work really closely to put your whole team together. So I can't answer everything, but I can help flesh out the details and bring experts to the table to put it all together.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking us through this, and looking forward to seeing you at Summit.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.